cowboy saved a giant Apache warrior. Next day, the chief ordered him to marry her. The sun was already sinking low when the cowboy guided his horse across the dry land. Dust rose with every slow step, clinging to his boots and the hem of his coat. It had been a long day, and the cattle were finally settled far behind him. He planned to camp near a shallow creek before night fully arrived. The land was quiet in a way that made him uneasy. Not peaceful, just empty. He had traveled this route before, but something felt different. The birds were silent. Even the wind seemed careful, moving softly across the tall grass as if it didn't want to be noticed. The cowboy slowed his horse, listening closely. Years on the frontier had taught him that silence often meant trouble. As he moved forward, he noticed signs on the ground, tracks, disturbed soil, broken branches. They were fresh. He knew enough to recognize that this area was not empty after all. His hand rested near his saddle, not in fear, but in caution. He told himself to stay calm. Panic never helped anyone survive. A short distance ahead, the land dipped slightly. From the rise, he saw something dark against the pale earth. At first, he thought it was a fallen tree or an abandoned bundle. Then his horse stopped on its own, ears turning sharply forward. That was when the cowboy knew it was something else. He dismounted quietly and approached on foot. As he came closer, the shape became clearer. It was a person lying on the ground, unmoving. Around the area were signs of a recent struggle. Scattered items, deep marks in the dirt, and footprints leading away in many directions. The cowboy swallowed hard. This was not his fight, he told himself. Getting involved could bring serious trouble. People disappeared on this land for far less. Still, he couldn't turn away. He never had been able to ignore someone in need. When he knelt down, he realized the person was a woman. Not just any woman. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and built like a warrior. Her clothing marked her as Apache, and her presence alone explained the silence of the land. Encounters like this often ended badly for outsiders. She was badly hurt and barely breathing. Her face was calm, though pale, as if she had already accepted whatever came next. The cowboy hesitated. Helping her could mean death if her people found out. Leaving her meant certain loss of life. He closed his eyes for a moment and let out a slow breath. He remembered his mother's voice from long ago, telling him that doing the right thing often costs something. He had never forgotten that lesson. Carefully, he checked her breathing and looked at her injuries. He worked slowly, respectfully, making sure not to cause more harm. He used clean water from his canteen and cloth torn from his own shirt. Every movement was quiet, quick, and focused. As he worked, he noticed her size more clearly. She was much larger than most people he had seen, strong even in her stillness. This was no ordinary warrior. There was power in her presence, even while she lay helpless on the ground. The sun dipped lower, and shadows stretched across the land. Night would come soon, and with it, danger. He couldn't stay long. He did what he could, enough to give her a chance. Before leaving, he placed his blanket over her to keep her warm. For a moment, he considered staying until morning, but that would be foolish. If her tribe returned, they would not wait to ask questions. He mounted his horse quietly and looked back one last time. "I hope you make it," he said softly, knowing she likely couldn't hear him. Then he rode away. That night, sleep did not come easily. The cowboy's mind kept returning to the woman on the ground. He wondered if she had survived. He wondered if he had made the right choice, or a fatal one. The frontier was full of moments like that, moments where one decision could change everything. Before dawn, he was awake again, packing his things quickly. He planned to leave the area at first light. The land felt watched now. Every sound made his shoulders tense. As he prepared to leave, he heard something, hoofbeats, but not his own. There were many, moving with purpose. He cursed quietly under his breath. It was too late. Figures appeared on the horizon, riding fast and silent. Apache warriors surrounded him before he could react. Their faces were calm, unreadable. He did not resist. Resistance would only make things worse. They searched him, then motioned for him to follow. No words were spoken. The cowboy's heart pounded, but his face stayed steady. Fear would not help him now. As they rode, his thoughts raced. Had they found the woman? Was she alive? Had his attempt to help been seen as interference, or worse, an insult? The journey felt long, though the sun had barely risen. They entered a large camp hidden among trees and rock. People stopped what they were doing to watch him pass. Children stared. Elders whispered. He was brought before the center of the camp and told to wait. Hours passed. No one spoke to him. No one harmed him either. That uncertainty was worse than anger. Finally, movement caught his eye. From one of his shelters emerged the woman. She walked slowly but steadily. Fresh bandages were visible, and she leaned slightly on a staff, but she stood tall, very tall, strong, alive. Her eyes met his, sharp and searching. In that moment, the cowboy knew his life would never be the same. The cowboy's eyes never left the woman as she approached. She moved with quiet confidence, each step deliberate, showing her strength even after her injuries. Around the camp, whispers rose and fell like the wind. Some spoke of the rescue, others of his courage, and still others of the danger he had brought by entering their territory. He could feel their gazes, heavy and full of questions he could not answer. The woman stopped a few feet away and studied him. Her face was serious, almost unreadable. She did not smile, nor did she look angry. She only looked at him, trying to understand. For a moment, the cowboy felt as though she could see right into him. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his calm. A tall man stepped forward behind her, older and regal. He carried himself with authority that silenced the whispers of the crowd. This was clearly the chief. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned the cowboy, measuring him. The cowboy could feel the weight of tradition and expectation pressing down, heavier than any saddle or pack he had ever carried. The chief motioned for the cowboy to kneel. He did so slowly, one knee bending to the earth, his hands resting on the other. He did not speak, but the silence itself was full of meaning. Every eye in the camp was on him. Every breath he took seemed to echo. He knew the chief would decide the next course of his life. One wrong move, one sign of fear or disrespect, and there could be disaster. The chief's voice finally broke the silence. It was calm, steady, and carried a tone that brooked no argument. "You have done something unusual," he said. "You have chosen to save a life, even when it was dangerous for you. That choice has consequences. You must now understand them." The cowboy nodded slowly, not out of agreement, but out of recognition. He understood that his actions had set in motion events he could not control. He had acted out of instinct and compassion, but now he faced the full weight of consequences that went far beyond his understanding of the land or the people who lived there. The woman stepped closer. Her eyes, still serious, softened just a little. She did not speak, but the chief's words made it clear she had a voice in this decision. The cowboy wondered what she thought. Was she angry with him? Confused? Or perhaps she understood in her own way why he had risked himself for her life. The chief motioned for others to join them in a circle. Elders, warriors, and family members formed a ring around the central group. The air was thick with tension. It was as if time had slowed, and the cowboy felt every heartbeat, every shift in the breeze, every whisper of movement in the camp. Finally, the chief spoke again. "Life and death are sacred. You have saved one, and for that, a bond is created. This is not punishment, nor is it reward. It is the way of respect, the way of honor. You must accept that your actions affect more than yourself." The cowboy listened carefully. He had traveled this land for years, but he had never encountered a situation like this. He had expected anger or distrust, maybe even punishment, but instead he was faced with a mixture of respect and obligation that he could barely comprehend. He looked at the woman. She had stood quietly throughout the proceedings, her gaze steady and unwavering. The chief's words implied something more than mere gratitude. The cowboy sensed that their lives were now linked in ways he could not yet understand. He tried to imagine what it would mean to live in a community so bound by tradition, where a single act of kindness could ripple through so many lives. The chief continued, "The one whose life you saved carries the voice of her family and her people. She has been your witness, and she has the right to speak. What do you say, warrior?" The woman stepped forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but clear. "He saved me when I could not save myself. That cannot be forgotten. My life is given back to me because of his choice. I will not forget it." Her words were simple, yet they carried weight beyond anything the cowboy had experienced. There was no anger, no accusation, only recognition of what had been done. The cowboy felt a strange sense of relief, though he knew the situation was far from over. He had earned respect, but the path ahead was still uncertain. The chief nodded slowly. "Then the bond is recognized. A life saved is a life connected. You are now part of our community, not by birth, but by choice and courage. You will live among us, and your actions will be remembered." The cowboy swallowed again. He had expected punishment, but he had not expected this. The idea of living within the rules, the customs, and the traditions of a people so different from his own was both intimidating and humbling. He had to adjust his thinking quickly if he hoped to survive. Over the next hours, the cowboy was shown to a place to rest within the camp. He was not locked away or watched constantly, but he was clearly under observation. He noticed how the people moved around him, careful, deliberate, respectful. Children peeked from behind their mothers, elders observed quietly, and warriors kept their distance while maintaining awareness. Everything in the camp seemed connected, organized by a sense of order that he had never fully seen in his travels. The woman remained nearby, though not constantly at his side. Occasionally, she would come to check silently on him, offering a small nod or brief glance. It was clear that she had her own duties, responsibilities, and pride, but that she acknowledged him as someone important now. That night, the cowboy lay on the blanket provided to him and stared at the stars. The sky stretched wide above the camp, full of light and vastness. He thought about the choices he had made, the risk he had taken, and the uncertainty that now surrounded him. It was one thing to face danger alone in the open land, but quite another to face it within the eyes of an entire community whose customs and expectations he barely understood. Despite the fear and uncertainty, there was a sense of connection he had not felt before. The woman's life had been saved, and in doing so, he had become part of something larger than himself. The idea was both frightening and oddly comforting. He understood, at least in part, the chief's words about respect, life, and honor. The next morning, the cowboy woke to the sound of activity in the camp. The woman approached him again, walking with strength and steadiness. She carried a small bundle of food and water, which she placed near him. No words were spoken, but her presence carried meaning. She was showing him that he was recognized, accepted, and that his survival depended not only on himself, but also on understanding and respecting her people. They shared a quiet meal, sitting across from each other, observing the camp and the people moving through it. The cowboy noticed the care with which the community operated, how each person seemed to have a role, a responsibility, and a respect for one another. It was a world very different from the open frontier he had traveled, yet it had a rhythm and strength that he found impressive. The woman finally spoke. "You are lucky to live, and it is not only because of your own skill. You have learned a lesson today. Life is never just about you. Every action changes someone else." The cowboy nodded, understanding her meaning. He had saved her, yes, but in doing so, he had also changed the lives of the people in the camp. He realized that survival was not only about physical strength or courage, but also about respect, awareness, and the ability to act with both wisdom and heart. As the sun rose higher, the chief appeared once more. He observed the cowboy and the woman silently for a long time, then finally spoke. "Your choice yesterday has set events in motion that cannot be undone. You will remain with us, and together you will learn what it means to be connected to our lives. Respect is given, but it must also be understood." The cowboy felt the weight of the chief's words. He was no longer alone. His actions had created bonds, obligations, and connections he had never anticipated. There was no turning back, only moving forward, learning, and understanding. And so, the day passed slowly but fully. A cowboy began to see the rhythm of the camp, the quiet strength of the people around him, and the resilience of the woman he had saved. Each moment was a lesson, each glance and gesture a small insight into a world he had never known. By nightfall, he realized that the frontier was no longer just land and danger. It was also relationships, choices, and consequences. Every decision had meaning, every action created change, and every life was connected in ways he had never imagined. He closed his eyes under the wide sky, aware that the days to come would bring challenges, discoveries, and perhaps more surprises. But he also knew that he would face them with respect, courage, and a growing understanding of a world far larger than himself. The next morning, the cowboy awoke to a camp that seemed alive in a way he had never seen before. Children ran carefully among the tents, elders moved slowly but purposefully, and warriors trained quietly, their movements precise and controlled. Everything had meaning, and everything seemed connected. The cowboy felt both out of place and strangely honored to witness it. The woman he had saved was already awake, tending to small chores in the camp. Even in her recovery, she moved with strength and confidence, showing no signs of weakness. The cowboy watched her from a distance, noting how naturally she commanded attention and respect without ever raising her voice. There was no arrogance in her, only quiet authority. He realized that she had earned the loyalty of everyone here, not by words, but by action and presence. By mid-morning, the chief called for a gathering. Word spread quickly, and the camp soon fell into a calm hush as everyone took their place around the central circle. The cowboy felt every eye on him as he stepped forward, uncertain but trying to remain composed. He could see the woman standing near the chief, her posture tall and unyielding yet calm. The chief looked directly at the cowboy. His gaze was steady and sharp, carrying the weight of generations. "Yesterday," he began, "you acted in a way that few outsiders would. You chose to save a life when you could have walked away. That choice does not go unnoticed." The cowboy nodded slowly, understanding that this was not praise or punishment. It was recognition. He remained silent, unsure what was expected next. The chief's voice grew firmer. "In our ways, when a life is saved, a bond is created. That bond is not broken easily. It carries responsibility, respect, and honor. Your choice has connected you to our people in ways that cannot be undone." The cowboy felt his stomach tighten. He had known that helping her could have consequences, but he had not imagined anything like this. The weight of obligation pressed on him in a way that was unfamiliar and intimidating. The woman stepped forward, her eyes meeting his. "I live because of him," she said simply. "This is truth. The bond is real. The people must see it, and the people must decide what it means." There was silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. The cowboy understood that this moment was not just about gratitude. It was about tradition, honor, and the decisions of a community that valued life, courage, and connection above all else. The chief raised his hand, and the murmurs of the camp ceased. "The warrior you saved is a respected member of this tribe," he said. "Her life is precious, and the one who saves her cannot simply leave. A life debt has been created, and it must be honored." The cowboy felt his heart beat faster. Life debt. He had heard of such customs and stories, but had never imagined facing one himself. He had acted out of instinct, not knowledge of tradition, and now he was caught in its full weight. The chief continued, his voice calm but unyielding. "This debt cannot be repaid with words, gifts, or empty gestures. Only through action, commitment, and understanding can it be honored. You have a choice, though it is not an easy one. You can leave, but know that doing so will break the bond and bring consequences beyond what you can imagine. Or you can accept the bond and live among us, learning our ways and respecting our people." The cowboy felt a rush of conflicting thoughts. He had never imagined staying in a camp like this, bound by traditions so different from his own. He valued freedom above all else, and the idea of obligation to a community he barely understood was frightening. Yet, leaving felt like abandoning the woman he had saved, and perhaps failing a promise his heart had already made. The woman watched him closely, her expression steady. She did not speak, but her eyes carried meaning. There was no anger, no pressure, only a quiet challenge to recognize the responsibility of what had been done and to act accordingly. The chief finally spoke again. "The bond between life saved and life saved is sacred. It is a bridge between people, a promise that cannot be broken. You will remain in this camp. You will learn, you will observe, and you will act with respect. This is the only way to honor the life you have given back to the warrior." The cowboy nodded slowly, understanding that resistance would not help. This was not about fear or punishment. It was about choice, courage, and honor. He could try to leave, but that path would lead only to further complications. To stay was to accept the unknown, to embrace a life that would challenge every assumption he had ever held. Over the next few hours, the chief explained more about the customs of the tribe. Every word was measured. Every story carried lessons about respect, courage, and community. The cowboy listened carefully, trying to absorb as much as he could. The woman occasionally spoke, offering explanations and guidance, and he realized that she had her own wisdom and insight that went beyond physical strength. By afternoon, the chief made his decision clear. "Because you have saved her life and shown courage in doing so," he said, "you are now connected to her and to her people in a way that cannot be undone. Your actions yesterday created a bond. That bond carries responsibility. Therefore, you will live among us, and together you will honor this connection." The cowboy felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. Relief that the chief had not punished him, but uncertainty about what it meant to live under these new rules, expectations, and responsibilities. He had entered this land as a stranger, a traveler passing through. Now he was part of a community, whether he was ready or not. The woman stepped forward once more. "You have chosen to save me," she said. "Now you must learn to live with what that choice means. It is not only about me, it is about our people, our land, and the bond that has been created. You will need patience, courage, and understanding to honor it." The cowboy nodded again, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that this was a moment he could not ignore or escape. The frontier had tested him many times, but never like this. He had faced danger, storms, and wild animals, but nothing had challenged him like the responsibilities now placed before him. As the sun began to set, he was guided to a place to rest within the camp. This was not a punishment, but a sign of trust. He would have time to observe, learn, and understand the ways of the people he had become part of. The woman stayed nearby, tending to her own tasks, but occasionally glancing his way, reminding him silently that their lives were now connected. That night, he lay under the stars, thinking about the day's events. He realized that courage was not just about facing physical danger. It was also about understanding, respect, and the willingness to take responsibility for one's actions. Saving a life had brought him here, but living with the consequences would require more than bravery. It would require wisdom, patience, and heart. He thought about the woman. She had faced pain, danger, and uncertainty with strength and dignity. Her life was not easy, yet she moved through it with grace. The cowboy understood that his role was not to lead or command, but to support, respect, and honor the bond that had been created. As sleep approached, he felt a sense of both fear and possibility. The days ahead would be challenging. The customs, the traditions, and the expectations were new and complex. Yet he also felt a quiet hope that by acting with respect and courage, he could find his place, earn trust, and perhaps even build a life he had never imagined. The next morning, the camp moved with purpose again. The woman was up early, performing her duties with strength and efficiency. The cowboy observed, learning quietly, aware that every action had meaning and that every gesture reflected a deeper understanding of the world he had entered. The chief appeared once more, silent but commanding. His gaze fell on the cowboy, and in that look, there was acknowledgement of the choice made, the courage shown, and the responsibilities accepted. The cowboy understood without words. The decision had been made, and the journey ahead was now his to navigate. He rose to meet it with determination. The frontier had brought him challenges before, but this challenge was different. It was not about survival alone. It was about respect, honor, and understanding. He was no longer a lone traveler. He was part of a story larger than himself, connected by courage, choice, and the bond he had created by saving a life. And so the cowboy began the next chapter of his life, uncertain but committed, aware that every moment, every decision, and every action would matter in ways he had never imagined. The woman he had saved stood nearby, a silent partner and guide, reminding him that strength, courage, and respect were not only for the battlefield but for every day, every choice. and every connection he now carried with him. The days after the chief's decision were filled with tension and quiet unease. The cowboy had accepted, at least outwardly, that he would remain in the camp, but acceptance did not come easily. Every movement, every glance, and every word reminded him that he was no longer a stranger merely passing through. He was now part of a world governed by customs he barely understood, connected by a bond that was both new and daunting. The woman he had saved approached him early one morning. Her steps were steady, yet she did not smile. She carried water from the nearby stream and offered it to him. He took it carefully, noticing how her eyes never left his face. There was a quiet authority in the way she moved, a sense of pride that demanded attention. For the cowboy, it was both intimidating and humbling. You must understand, she said finally, her voice calm but firm. This bond is not simple. It is not a friendship. It is responsibility. It is respect. And it is trust. All of these must be earned. The cowboy nodded slowly. He had heard this before, in the chief's words, but hearing it again, directly from her, carried more weight. She was not just a symbol of the bond. She was a living, breathing person whose life and respect now intertwined with his own. Days turned into weeks. The cowboy followed the routines of the camp, learning slowly. He observed how the women and men worked together, how the children learned, and how the elders guided without harshness but with authority. Every detail carried meaning, and every action seemed connected to the larger life of the community. Yet, despite his efforts, resistance lingered in his heart. He missed the freedom of open land, the ability to make his own choices without consequence. Here, even the smallest action had significance, and every word or gesture was measured against the expectations of people who had lived by these rules for generations. The woman, too, showed signs of tension. She had been forced to rely on him in ways neither of them were used to. Her pride sometimes made her appear distant or even cold, and the cowboy felt that his presence, though necessary, was still unwelcome in some moments. One afternoon, they were asked to perform a task together, gathering firewood for the camp. It seemed simple, but it was symbolic. The chief had chosen this task not for its difficulty, but to see how they would work together. At first, it was awkward. At the time, the cowboy moved with caution, trying not to overstep or act in a way that might offend. The woman moved with efficiency, picking up the heavier logs with ease, her strength evident in every motion. At times, she spoke instructions, not unkindly, but with precision, expecting the cowboy to follow. He bristled slightly at her authority, but he reminded himself that respect was not weakness. Slowly, as the hours passed, a rhythm developed between them. They learned to anticipate each other's movements, to pass logs without speaking, and to carry out the work as a team. Each log gathered was a small victory, a step toward understanding and cooperation. That evening, as they rested by the fire, the cowboy reflected on the day. He realized that fear and resistance were natural, but they were also obstacles. The woman's strength and confidence were not meant to diminish him, but to guide him, to show that together they could accomplish more than they could alone. Over time, shared moments like this became lessons in trust. The cowboy learned that patience was as important as courage, and understanding as important as action. The woman, in turn, began to see that his intentions were sincere. He was not there to control, command, or impress. He was there to honor the bond, to respect the life that had been saved, and to navigate the traditions of a world he was only beginning to understand. One morning, while walking near the river, the woman stopped and looked at him closely. "You are learning," she said. "Not all will accept it quickly. Some will doubt you, Some will test you, but courage is not just about strength. It is about patience, understanding, and respect. These are the tests you must pass. The cowboy listened carefully. He had faced many dangers before, storms, wild animals, and hostile lands, but this was different. Here, survival was not only physical but also moral and social. He realized that honor, trust, and the ability to work together were just as crucial as bravery or skill with a horse or rope. At first, the camp watched them cautiously. Some elders nodded when they saw cooperation. Some warriors whispered among themselves. Children observed with curiosity, learning from the example being set before them. The cowboy noticed that every action had ripple effects. What he did, how he behaved, and how he respected the bond influenced everyone around him. One evening, as the sun set in soft hues of orange and gold, they were called to the chief once again. He observed them silently for a long moment before speaking. "You have learned to work together," he said, "but understanding is more than doing a task. It is seeing each other, respecting each other, and trusting each other. You are connected by what you have done, but you must also choose to live with it willingly." The cowboy felt a weight of responsibility settle over him, heavier than any saddle or pack he had carried. He understood that he could not act impulsively or selfishly. He had to consider the woman, the tribe, and the bond they now shared. Every choice mattered. Every word mattered. The woman stepped forward, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "We have learned to work together," she said. "But it is more than that. You must learn to understand me, not just follow instructions. And I must learn to understand you. Only then will the bond be real. Only then will we truly be connected." The cowboy realized that she was right. The bond was more than duty. It was recognition, respect, and understanding. It was not imposed by the chief alone, but created by their choices, actions, and willingness to see each other as equals in strength, courage, and heart. Over the following weeks, small routines and shared experiences built a foundation of trust. They learned to communicate with subtle gestures, anticipate each other's needs, and respect each other's strengths. The cowboy's admiration for the woman grew, not as a romantic feeling at first, but as deep respect for her courage, wisdom, and leadership. She, in turn, saw his sincerity, patience, and willingness to adapt as proof that the bond was genuine. Even as trust grew, moments of tension persisted. Fear of failure, doubt from the community, and uncertainty about the future all created challenges. Yet each challenge became an opportunity for growth, teaching them patience, humility, and the importance of connection. One day, while helping the woman repair a small shelter, the cowboy realized something. The work was not just physical, it was symbolic. Every nail, every piece of wood, and every action represented a step toward understanding, cooperation, and respect. He felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with personal skill or survival. It was about shared purpose, shared effort, and shared trust. The woman smiled briefly at him, a rare and genuine smile. It was not wide or playful, but it was meaningful. It said, without words, that progress was being made, that the bond was growing stronger, that respect, patience, and understanding could overcome fear, doubt, and hesitation. That night, as they sat by the fire, the cowboy reflected on the weeks that had passed. He had entered the camp as an outsider, a stranger with only instinct and courage to guide him. Now he was part of a community, bound by respect, trust, and a shared sense of purpose. The bond with the woman he had saved was no longer just about life and duty. It was about connection, growth, and understanding. He realized that the frontier had tested him in ways he had never imagined. courage alone was not enough. Courage alone was not enough. Strength alone was not enough. It was the willingness to learn, adapt, and connect that mattered most. And in this realization, he found not fear, but purpose. The woman sitting quietly beside him placed her hand briefly on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. They had faced resistance, fear, and uncertainty together, and now they were beginning to build something stronger, something that could endure challenges, bridge differences, and honor the lives they had been given. As the fire flickered and the stars shone above, the cowboy understood that this was only the beginning. The bond, once forced, was becoming real. The fear, once heavy, was now tempered by understanding, and the future, though uncertain, was filled with possibility. Together they would face whatever came next, side by side, learning, growing, and honoring the connection that had started with a single act of courage. Time passed in a rhythm the cowboy had never known. The sun rose and fell, days blurred into weeks, and weeks into months. Life in the camp became familiar, yet never easy. He had learned to move with purpose, to observe and to respect the traditions that governed the community. What once felt foreign now began to make sense in ways he had never expected. The woman he had saved continued to be both guide and challenge. Her strength and confidence had not faded, but now they were tempered with trust. She no longer spoke with authority alone, she spoke with understanding. Together, they had learned how to communicate without words, anticipate each other's movements, and share responsibilities. Every task they completed side by side strengthened their connection, making the bond between them tangible and enduring. The cowboy realized that he no longer feared the expectations placed upon him. He had begun to see them not as restrictions, but as a framework for action. Respect, trust, and cooperation were not chains. They were tools, guiding him toward a better understanding of the people he had once feared. He could move, speak, and act with awareness, knowing that every choice mattered, not only for himself, but for the woman, for the tribe, and for the life he had helped preserve. One morning, the chief called him to the center of the camp. The cowboy approached cautiously, aware that every action was observed by the community. The chief's face was calm, but there was pride in his eyes. "You have learned much," the chief said. "You have faced fear, you have accepted responsibility, and you have worked with the warrior you saved. The bond has grown stronger, and your actions are remembered. You are no longer an outsider, though your path began far from here. You are part of us now." The cowboy bowed his head slightly, feeling a mixture of humility and gratitude. Words were not enough to express what he felt. He had entered this place uncertain and fearful, and now he understood the depth of the lessons he had been given. Courage had led him here, but understanding, respect, and trust had allowed him to remain and to grow. The woman approached him after the chief spoke. She smiled briefly, a small gesture but full of meaning. "We have come far," she said. "It is not just about survival or obligation anymore. It is about connection, about understanding, about living together in a way that honors life, respect, and trust. We have learned that together we can face anything." The cowboy felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. He thought about the first moment he had seen her lying on the ground, injured and alone. At that moment he had acted instinctively, without thought for what might come. He had saved her because he could not walk away. And now, months later, that single act had changed both of their lives forever. The community, too, had begun to embrace him. Elders nodded in approval when he offered help. Children approached without fear, and warriors respected him for the courage he had shown and the patience he had learned. He realized that acceptance was not given lightly, nor was it immediate. It was earned through consistent action, respect, and understanding. Over time, the bond between the cowboy and the woman grew into something deeper than obligation. It was rooted in trust, shared experience, and mutual respect. They began to anticipate each other's thoughts and needs, to act in harmony, and to support one another in ways that were natural rather than forced. What had begun as duty had become partnership, and what had begun as obligation had become connection. One afternoon, while walking near the edge of the camp, the cowboy and the woman spoke quietly. "Do you remember the first day?" he asked. "When I found you, barely moving, and had no idea what would happen next?" She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I do, and I remember thinking that helping you might be more dangerous than staying still. But now," she smiled faintly, "now I see that your choice was not only brave, it was wise. You acted without knowing the consequences, and yet it changed everything for the better." The cowboy smiled, realizing how much he had learned. Courage, he understood now, was more than facing danger. It was acting with heart and integrity, even when the outcome was uncertain. Strength was not just physical. It was the willingness to respect, to trust, and to learn. And honor was not only about tradition, it was about living with awareness of how actions affect others. Days turned into months, and the seasons changed. The cowboy grew stronger not only in body, but in understanding. He became a trusted member of the community, offering help where needed, learning the ways of the people, and living with awareness of the bond he shared with the woman and the tribe. The woman, too, changed in subtle ways. She had always been strong and confident, but she had learned to rely on another, to share responsibilities, and to build trust through cooperation. The bond between them had transformed into partnership, a living connection that honored both the past and the present, both courage and respect. One evening, the camp gathered for a communal meal, celebrating the harvest. The cowboy and the woman worked together to prepare food, tending the fire and distributing portions. Around them, the community moved with rhythm and purpose, children laughing, elders smiling, and warriors nodding in approval. The cowboy realized that he had become part of something larger than himself, a community connected by trust, respect, and shared experience. After the meal, the chief addressed the camp. "This community has grown stronger because of actions taken with courage, respect, and understanding. The cowboy you see before you has shown all of these, and more. His bond with the warrior he saved is a testament to what can happen when life is honored and choices are made with heart." The cowboy felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had entered the camp as a stranger, unsure and wary, and now he was recognized not just for a single act, but for the growth, learning, and understanding that had followed. The life he had saved had created a connection that transformed both their lives and the lives of the community around them. That night, as he sat beside the woman under a sky filled with stars, he reflected on the journey. He remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the hesitation of those first days. He remembered the challenge of adapting to new rules, traditions, and expectations. And he remembered the quiet moments of cooperation, trust, and shared effort that had built the bond stronger than any obligation alone. "You have changed," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Not just in what you do, but in how you see the world. You understand now that every life matters, every choice matters, and every connection matters. You have grown, and that is more than courage. It is wisdom." The cowboy nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He realized that the journey was not only about saving a life, but about learning to live with integrity, respect, and awareness. He had faced fear, embraced responsibility, and built trust, and in doing so had found his place in a community, in a bond, and in a life richer than he had ever imagined. Over the following months, the bond between them became an example to the camp. It showed how courage combined with respect and understanding could create harmony, how obligation could transform into partnership, and how an act of compassion could ripple through many lives. The cowboy's single choice had not only saved a life, it had strengthened an entire community, bridged differences, and created a story that would be remembered for years. By the time spring arrived again, the cowboy and the woman were no longer defined by the circumstances that brought them together. They had built trust, learned from each other, and become partners in the fullest sense. Their bond was strong not because it had been required, but because it had been chosen, nurtured, and honored. The camp thrived around them, a living testament to courage, respect, and connection. And the cowboy, once a traveler, unsure of the land and its people, had become a part of something greater than himself. His journey had begun with fear and uncertainty, but it had ended with understanding, purpose, and a lasting impact that would be remembered long after the days had passed. As he looked across the camp, watching children laugh, elders share wisdom, and warriors train, he felt a quiet pride, not for himself, but for the lives touched, the bond honored, and the lessons learned. He understood now that the frontier was not only about survival, it was about respect, connection, and the courage to act with heart. And in that understanding, he found peace, purpose, and a life that had grown far richer than he could have imagined when he first rode across the open land, unaware of the adventure, responsibility, and bond that awaited him.